Hi, and welcome to this week's UMIP review call. We've only got one UMIP to review this week, which is to add X sushi to API as price identifier. I saw that there were a few small comments left on the initial review. So there was some more minor comments with quote currency contract addresses, recommendation for generalized APY calculation period, and price feed implementation. JS, I take it, is yourself, John. Do you want to speak to this? Do you know?
Oh, that's just a JavaScript, but I did also make that comment.
Oh, nice.
So both are accurate.
Okay. Does anyone want to speak to this? Janice, Sean?
I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, I recommended doing this so that they would have redundancy from people who are running proposer disputer bots in our community. We kind of want to push people to do this. You could do it without a JavaScript version of a price feed, and I know that they sometimes have price feeds in Go or Python, and I think it was some Python-like pseudocode, and it's doable, but you kind of have to plan around that because you need to have some other mechanism for people to propose and dispute prices and enough of a liveness period that you can feel confident in that, where you can feel a little bit more confident or a lot more confident if you have a JavaScript implementation and our bots and other people's bots are running proposers and disputers against it. It's also something that's pretty simple in this case. It's not like a super complicated price feed. So I think that they ought to be able to implement it in JavaScript and just add that in.
So it's kind of necessary before the UMIP passes?
I wouldn't say that it's strictly necessary, but it's highly recommended. I think it's like a best practice that we should be very much encouraging people to do. And I think that they have the capacity to do it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So not necessarily a blocker, but something that we should communicate they should do. But if they don't do within the next day or so, isn't going to block it from a vote, right?
Cool. Okay. And then there's also the recommendation to generalize the APY calculation period.
Yeah, this also is product specific and only a recommendation, just in case they might have an idea to use this product for other periods. So instead of having next time making similar API for, let's say, 2 weeks or 1 month's calculation, then that parameter could be passed as ancillary data. But that's also not a strict requirement, especially if this is the only product and the only period they are going to use.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, there's not really a downside in just putting the period in ancillary data. I mean, it's probably as complicated from an implementation perspective. It'll just change how far you look back, right? More than anything else. So I think that we should probably like recommend more strongly than like as a general rule, right? If we can put generalizations like that in the ancillary data.
Sounds sensible. Would we say it's a blocker, Chris?
I think it's less of a blocker than not having an implementation in JavaScript. I think with these kinds of things, like John's point about like us being able to run dispute bots and other people in the community is like more important than how generalized it is. In my opinion, that's a blocker. But yeah, I'm not sure what everyone else thinks in terms of that. But from my perspective, it's generally not a great idea for us to vote on anything that we can't run bots on. So yeah.
Yeah.
Revisit issue. Do we want to insist on that? Do we want to revisit the price feed implementation? Do we want to insist on that in the light of Chris's comments?
So I'd be in favor of, just like John said, like highly encouraging this and kind of requiring it, or trying to communicate that we require this like outside of the governance process. I think it's not dangerous,
Okay.
but I think it's pretty difficult to like have a defined rule around always needing price feeds. At least like half the identifiers that we get nowadays, or maybe not half, but a lot that we get nowadays are for KPI options, where creating a price feed is oftentimes like not very doable.
Unnecessary.
And for
Okay,
LSP
so 2 strong recommendations.
maybe I have a lag or something, I don't know. But I was just gonna say, for LSP contracts, like, I mean, this really isn't necessary until they actually have a price request, which is probably like a few months down the road. Yeah.
I agree with that.
So
it's just,
2 strong
it would just be bad if
recommendations.
a situation, it would just be bad if a situation came about, right, where they have like a really tight liveness and, you know, so as a general like rule though, there's like no way for us to enforce this, right? So, other than like outside of governance recommending it very strongly to people, like as a, like for the other things that we've set up here, like, do we have any systems in place to maybe identify price feeds that could be problematic? Like, let's say like a KPI options price feed that is parameterized with like a really short liveness, like and this is like obviously a pretty meta comment more than just for the specific feed, but maybe we should consider building some sort of script that can identify like contracts that might be like potentially difficult to settle fairly, right? Let's put it that way, right? So like something that we know we don't have a feed for, we're not running a bot for, and has like a short liveness, and then it like runs every day and like looks for these kinds of contracts, so we can like be proactive around identifying these beforehand. Maybe that would be something good to build in the future to try and mitigate this exact scenario, right?
I think that's a really good idea, and that's something that Mari's been working on, just like a process for looking over contracts parameters and making recommendations around best practices. But I love the idea of having a script that also just scans continuously for obvious cases.
Yeah, like with the LSP, for example, like it would be pretty trivial to check if you've set a financial product library, but you didn't initialize it. Like, you know, things like that, where the contract's obviously broken, and we can like flag it before money gets put in it. And, you know, like the first logical step would be in UMIVerse to like identify products that maybe are potentially misparameterized, right? Like it's like additional metadata for the API, for example, as like an easy endpoint for this. But sorry, I didn't mean to derail the conversation too much away from the UMIP itself. But yeah, we should definitely sync up on this idea and like see what tooling we can add to the Eng backlog for this.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good conversation too, and especially because we only really have one UMIP, we might as well talk about the kind of meta things and use that time effectively. So I think it's a great comment. So Vari, I guess as we get deeper into that, maybe that'll be like a DevX thing to work on a script that does a scan.
One question I have is that part of the reward mechanism that we have with liquidity mining and KPI options grant program is there a requirement to have proposer bots set up?
What do you?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. So the consideration here is that these contracts might have higher risk, but we're not rewarding them because they don't meet the requirements.
Rewarding them with what?
So my question was, do we have a clause in our liquidity or our kind of mining program, developer mining program, to say if you don't run a proposer and dispute a bot, you're not eligible.
Oh, yeah, that is part of the mining program. Well, actually, no. As part of the mining program is like the liquidation and disputer bots, not the optimistic Oracle bots. I don't know. It's an interesting idea. It'd be pretty difficult to enforce because you wouldn't actually know until the end of the contract's life cycle if somebody else is running bots for this specific price identifier.
Yeah. And you couldn't even run like a lock on it even. Like it's
Yeah.
like like these liveness games are like impossible to verify, I think.
But you'd be able to require a price feed to be written. So that's like a carrot for that.
Yeah, so my whole comment was just around, like, we're incentivizing the enforcement mechanism. I'm sorry, not the enforcement mechanism, the security mechanism. But if the team doesn't do it, it's like it's hard for us to say no. And so this might be a prime example of, like, if they can't get a price feed in place for bots to run, then they won't be able to get rewards out of it. So it's actually in their incentive to do that, but we can't block this because of that. So the strong recommendation is the carrot.
That makes sense, Chandler. I do wonder, Chris, have you seen the kind of audit paper that I put together? We weren't calling it an audit because John keeps telling me off for that. But it was about checking the contract parameters. Did you see that, Chris?
No, I haven't seen that.
Okay, because it does occur to me that it's kind of, like John said, it's kind of in the same domain, just a little bit different. And I wonder if we should really get some time together to talk about some of those bigger issues and how we solve them.
Definitely,
Yeah.
and figuring out, like, I think the key, at least from an engineering perspective, is like figuring out what of the checks that you think are important we can automate, right? And then like trying to like, yeah, just pick those out as quickly as possible automatically. But yeah, let's schedule something maybe later this week and we can go through that.
Okay, that sounds like a good way forward for that. So we've got 2 strong recommendations, but no blockers. There was also a couple of other minor comments. They've put the quote currency in erroneously, I think. And we need the contract addresses. That is a blocker, yes.
Yes, I think for this one it should be added, yeah. But just to precisely identify which part, how to precisely calculate it, but it's nothing like that couldn't be like done.
I'd say that's pretty important, and it's especially important given that we've now got stuff running on Polygon as well, to make sure that we're on this right chain and things. Cool. So we've got a blocker around contract addresses and 2 strong recommendations.
Rainis, did you have other issues with the script? No, it's perfectly fine. Just having these addresses as inputs, and that's it. Gotcha. But for like the block amounts, they don't affect like significantly. It's anyways like pseudo code, and actual like implementation would be like different. The natural language implementation is fine for this. Okay.
Cool. Is there any other issues that people want to talk about or that are outstanding?
Nope.
Oh, that was short and sweet. Excellent. Thanks to everyone for turning up.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, y'all.
Thank you.
guys.
That's it.